Alright guys, so in these next two clips, one of them was lit with a $1,200 light and the other was lit with a $19 light. Like, absolutely crazy price difference, but I want you to let me know in the comments below which one you think is which, and then afterwards I'll tell you which one was actually which, and I'll also tell you how to set it up. So I think it's pretty safe to say that even if you only have cheap lights, you can still get a really good looking image out of your camera. Kind of. So the first light that I used is the NANLITE MIXPANEL 150, and it's actually the light that's lighting me right now, and it's the main light that I used in pretty much all my YouTube videos. And the second light is the YC Onion Brownie, and that's the one that costs $19. Now once I'd actually finished grading these clips to make them look as similar to each other as possible, I honestly got to the point where I started to lose track of which one was which. But there is one main thing that I actually stuffed up when I was shooting this that gives it away straight away. And once I show you, you won't be able to unsee it. And that is, if we look next to the computer, there's this really harsh shadow. And that is a key giveaway. That is a smaller light source. So basically the key thing to know when wanting to make nice, soft, diffused light is to make the light source as big as you possibly can and have it as close to your subject as you can. So we think of the sun as an example. So the sun is obviously a very, very big light source, but because it's so far away from us, it ends up being a small light source and it makes it a hard light. But on an overcast day when there's a ton of clouds in the sky, that same light source, which is the sun, now has to go hit those clouds and then pass through, and essentially the clouds are acting as like a giant softbox or a giant layer of diffusion. So with this in mind, to make the YC Onion Brownie a much softer light source, I know I need to make it a lot bigger. So we need to add some diffusion on the front, and the easiest way to do this and the cheapest way is to just get baking paper. So by putting baking paper in front of the YC Onion Brownie, then what we're doing is that baking paper now becomes the light source because all the light hitting it spreads out, then it makes a softer light. Now with the MIXPANEL, I did put a softbox on it to make it even softer, but realistically, because the MIXPANEL is so big by itself, you don't even really need to put like diffusion on it. You can literally just shoot straight with it. As long as you get it close enough to your subject, it actually is quite soft straight away. So now number one is done, which is make the source as big as possible, and number two was to bring it as close as possible, again, to make the light bigger. So literally a millimeter out of frame is where I had the YC Onion Brownie and that diffusion paper, because again, even though we've made the actual light source bigger, if we can bring it closer to our subject, in relation to me, the light source gets even bigger the closer it is. So that's why I want to bring it as close as possible. Now as for where to actually place the light, I have it just above eye level because we wanted to have a slightly downwards facing light, because if you think about like light in a natural environment, it's never below like horizontal, because obviously sun goes below the horizon and then it disappears. So most of the time it's coming down from an angle, so that's what we want to try to replicate. And then I also had it slightly off to the side, so like this shadow on my face that it creates is from it being angled, and by having an angled, well, it off to the side, it creates depth by having this contrast. So if I stand like this, it's actually quite a flat light because there's just not really many shadows, whereas if I stand like this, you see, you get this shadow, so you get that contrast and you get that depth and that shape. So now you're probably thinking like, why would I spend $1,200 on a light like this when I can get the exact same results for a light that costs $19? And the answer is, well, time. So if we look at the raw clips and just add a Rec 709 conversion light onto them, then it is super duper easy to see which one is the $19 light and which one's the $1,200 light. And that is because I probably spent like an hour kind of like tweaking the colors in post to try and make it look somewhat decent and make it look like the light that's coming from the MIXPANEL. Whereas the clip where I was using the MIXPANEL as the key light, it was like super easy. Like I just kind of like added the conversion light and then did very, very minor tweaks to actually make it look good. Plus the fact that like the MIXPANEL has the softbox attached to it, so you literally just set it up, turn it on, and you're good to go. Whereas with the YC Onion Brown, and we had to kind of like rig up that really ghetto diffusion paper thing in front, and that just takes more time to set up every time you want to use it. So not having to actually spend ages setting up your lights, and then also not having to spend like hours and hours in post-production correcting it to actually make it look natural and make it look good is the main reason. The other reason is light quality. So if we take the MIXPANEL 150 for an example, this has a very high CRI and TLCI, which is just measures to basically say that's a very color accurate light. And what this means is that if I set this light to 5600 Kelvin, and I also set my camera to 5600 Kelvin, that I know that it's basically going to look pretty close to like true color. I might have to do a few little tweaks here and there, but for the most part, it's going to do a very good job recreating what a human eye, I guess, would see if they're looking at me under this light. Whereas with the YC Onion Brownie, because it's a very, very budget and cheap light, the light quality is really, really bad. Like if you look at the actual like Rec 709 converted one, there's heaps of blue and there's heaps of magenta. Like it's just all over the place. Like to try and get my skin tones to look somewhat natural, I had to actually change the white balance on my camera from 5600 to 12,500 Kelvin, which is really, really warm, and that was to get the actual base image that you're seeing right now. Then not to mention a freaking butt ton of work in DaVinci Resolve to try like correct everything and make it look somewhat usable. And then obviously power, and I know you can't really compare like a 150 watt light to whatever that is, like an 8 watt light or something, but you have to keep this in mind. So like in this setup in a dark room, the YC Onion Brownie works okay because it's a dark environment, but if you go anywhere where there's like natural light or sunlight, it just doesn't work at all. Whereas with the MIXPANEL 150, obviously you've got 150 watts of power, so you can start to like compete and work against things like daylight to actually balance that out. So at the end of the day, you do get what you pay for. But if there's one thing you can take out of this, it's that next time you buy a light, focus on like quality rather than like quantity or like how cheap it can be. Because if you get a really nice quality light, then you can modify and do all that stuff to make it softer and do all that kind of stuff. But if you start with a really low quality light or low quality output of light, then it takes so much more effort to actually make it look good. And I have also reviewed a ton of different lights on this channel as well, so if you are looking to actually buy something, then be sure to check out those reviews as well before you make a decision. Alright guys, if you did enjoy this tutorial, then consider liking and subscribing, and if you actually use this technique on anything, then be sure to tag me on Instagram at Andrew Murphy W. I had this one down here. I always get the sides mixed up. But as always guys, stay creative and just be you. See ya.